Hey folks, it's Jeremy Kirkland. You're listening to Blammo. How you doing? You doing okay? You listening to this on a Tuesday, I bet. It's weird to have a new B episode drop on a Tuesday, but hey, look, I'm just saying we've been in the process of getting some stuff set up with Apple for a bit and had a few delays here, but we're almost there. That being said, it's kind of crazy. We're going to hit our 500th episode this season. We're pulling out all the stops. I think I was like doing the math at one point, or it might have been one of the people on the team, and they were like, yo, there's almost 12 weeks of you talking. I was like, that sounds awful. But I hope you're excited. But it doesn't matter because I'm incredibly excited for my guest this week. I am joined by multidisciplinary artist Nicholas Galanin. Nicholas is from the Sitka tribe of Alaska, and he's exhibited his works all over the world. From the Whitney Museum, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, to the Abu Dhabi Biennial, his works challenge stereotypes of indigenous art while also addressing social and environmental issues. He recently received the Don Tyson Prize for Outstanding Achievement in American Art from the Crystal Bridges Museum. That's a serious head museum, folks. That's legit. He's a legend, and look, I am honestly astounded he was able to make the time for my little show, but I'm so glad he's here. Nicholas and I discuss his life in Sitka, embracing cultural heritage, his incredible Never Forget series, which is one of my favorite series. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Fashion brands leveraging indigenous designs, and more. Nicholas, thank you so much for joining. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, no, I'm good. Thanks. Good to be here. Good to be home for a bit.
Yeah. Are you in Sitka right now?
Yeah. It's beautiful here. Yes. Harvesting season starting. We got through winter. Winters can be long.
Yeah. Weirdly, I've only been to Ninilchik
nice.
on the Kenai Peninsula.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I fell in love with just the beauty of Alaska. I mean, I saw the tiniest percentage of it just being on. I think the closest town we were, like, larger sort of town, I'm kind of air quoting, was like probably Homer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just an absolutely beautiful, incredible, wonderful place. I'll say this for listeners, like, it in terms of the climate, the sun didn't really set. It just kind of slid across the horizon, I mean, so we would get up in the, kind of, again, air quote, like the middle of the night and put on all of our clothes because it was somewhat dark. And then we'd wake up, later, and it would be like close to 80 degrees in our little tent. I mean, it was beautiful, just an absolute wonderful place. And I think we would eat a bunch of like fireweed and honey ice cream. There was like one general store that we would just kind of go and hit up. But other than that, we had to live off the land. So we had to do clam digging every day, and we went halibut fishing and king salmon fishing and off the Red River. And I mean, it was an incredible time. And I just have such a admiration, respect for Alaska. But how, just out of curiosity, like, because so much of your culture and your heritage is really based in Sitka, of how I've heard you reference and speak about your life. Like, do you set a limit for how long you let yourself be gone? I mean, because I know you were in New Zealand and London and stuff at times, but just curious.
I think it varies. I don't really set anything in the way that, I don't know if it works like that anyways, with the opportunities and work and
sure
the way things move. But, I have in my mind, I have this idea that I'm like, all right, I'm not going to leave this summer. And that's kind of, there's a intent there to, remain here for really important parts of the season, which is harvesting months, remain here for, more time with my family and my children when I can. And so, yeah, that's kind of that's an ideal goal, but it doesn't really work like that. There's just too many trips and things that I end up having to go to participate in with my work. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten to see a lot of your work. I mean, I think probably one of the things I saw in person was it was at the Whitney at the time, the White Noise American Prayer.
Oh yeah, White Noise American Prayer rug.
Yeah, pretty heavy. I mean, there's so much stuff I'd love to get into, but I think one of the things is, as a person who grew up very much, you had said that your father was a jeweler and your uncle, was a wood carver and stuff. When did you become maybe more okay or embracing of your cultural heritage?
Or do you feel that you had that from the get-go?
I feel like from the get-go there was this understanding of the significance of this work and the language and the, for me it was really a form of learning to, and it still is in a lot of ways. The work that I do is of access to community, access to learning and understanding the history and to things in the future, I suppose. But also, in that space, there was this version of learning through experience of the acceptance or non-acceptance of our culture, our people, our communities, our language, any of those end spaces, and to experience that alongside it. It can create a lot of things for different people in different ways, I suppose, of wanting to belong or wanting to be accepted or wanting to access, spaces for furthering ideas of success in the world, whatever that might be for individual. But and I feel like doing this work for me has provided a lot of different contexts and perspectives from my own community of the beauty and the importance of it to the outside communities, kind of perpetual stereotype or other things that might be pushed upon in that space. So for me, there was this sense of need for continuing to do this work and to do so in a way where it, upholds strength, truth, understanding, and kind of navigates the space in that sense. And yeah, I feel like the practice I work with still continues that in ways that's necessary. So
Yeah. I mean, you went to school first in, was it London?
yeah, and well, actually, I started higher education from high school at community college, and I did a few years of that. While I was in community college, I was doing these jewelry courses, casting, bronze, just creative work, and taking more of an intense interest in it. I think during that time too, I started working with cultural teachers in my community
Mm.
and doing like apprenticeships. So that was a big part of that time period. And then from there, I wanted to continue my learning, and yeah, that's when I went to London Guildhall University, which is now I think London Metropolitan. They merged, but yeah,
Yeah. What was that like going over there? Just in terms of like, in a sense, being from a smaller community to now this incredibly
yeah, it
large.
was really intense. It was. I think about it now, maybe more than I have, because I have children that are going off to school and university. And, it's fun to help them navigate the choices of, what they're interested in and where they'd like to be and where they, can or have options to do, for their education. And doing so, also being fully aware of the system that they're like participating in institutionally and being aware of how we're living in a time where a lot of these spaces are not neutral or safe spaces for students to engage with freedom of thought, freedom of creative voice, freedom of political expression, or there's so much censorship happening in the world right now, and especially in these university settings where they're not safe places for students to protest or gather in those forms. And so I think about that as well. I think about how these same institutions have called government, whether it's troopers or military or police force, on their own students and in these spaces. And while thinking about those things, while thinking about what these institutions embody or are supposed to embody, is pretty yeah. It's there's a lot I think to consider and understand. But for me, I was studying in London at the time. It was an intentional choice to study outside of the US for a few reasons. One, I wanted to travel and experience things. The other was the program at the time. I was studying jewelry design and silversmithing, and they had a very unique, focused program on that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think to go back on some of the stuff you said earlier, I think that that's a newer, I think, especially in around the United States, this level of insecurity on what, traditionally these institutions represented outside of the earlier history of some of the founding of them, but just what they had represented at that time, I think is slowly eroding. Well, in some cases, quickly eroding.
Yeah.
I do think that there is a thing that clicks or happens in a parent's life when as you're raising your kids and your children. I lost my father about a year ago, and I was talking to my mom about a lot of the things that she's gone with, and I feel like there's a certain point in people's lives where they get the opportunity to view their parents as peers. And I think for myself, I've gone from this clenched fist against family and my parents, my grandmother who passed, and into this open hand of apology. And now a parent myself, I've been seeing that, oh, I went through this. My father at the age I'm at now, when I was a kid, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. But there's this joy and excitement and just being able to kind of push a loved one in many ways to be an independent thinker and individual. And so I am curious about what level of joy, and maybe fear, but joy that's brought to your own artistic expressions and work.
I think in some of this conversation, there's always this question of, have I prepared my child for the world? And I don't think that's actually possible,
Yeah.
but it's there, like a parenting thought.
Yeah.
Like, have I prepared you for this world? And we say that even being fully unprepared ourselves, I think, in ways that we have to navigate always. So it requires, I feel like, there's always this a lot of listening and trust that goes into the era of, watching your child that you've raised enter their own, experiences and, place and voice in the world. So it's, for me, it's exciting, mainly as challenging or tough as those transitions might feel, or as parents, if we feel like nostalgia towards our own ideas of who they might be or who they can be. Those are kind of just our ideas, and it's fun to watch it really unravel in life, or unfold in life. Not unravel. But
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah.
Do your kids know that you're cool?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I mean,
Could ask them that.
Yeah. When you were in London, you were figuring out what you were trying to do there. What were what did your dad specifically think? Did you feel like this type of pressure from him or your uncle about your, becoming this jeweler and making stuff?
No, there was never pressure, just support. Always, it was support and care of, providing and sharing knowledge or opportunity, and kind of just this like, yeah, go do it, go see it. Like, we're rooting for you. And I think that has always been, really, I think that was a really nurturing part of foundation of my path and journey, at least. So.
I mean, what an incredibly strong individual to also, because as we were talking about, even though it's a different time of raising children and empowering them, makes you wonder what was going through his head as now you're jumping to a different continent.
Yeah, no kidding. I think there was some joy maybe of hearing about the process and the experiences, and my father was he loved traveling too. Mm-hmm. And was responsible for my next step from university in London, which was to go to Aotearoa in New Zealand, and that's where he had been living for years, kind of deeply embedded with the Maori artist community out there, and I went to visit while I was in London on a break. I flew 24 hours, which was insane, on a 2 12-hour flights or something, and got to spend some time there. And I learned that there was a master's program at Massey University, with focus on indigenous history, community arts, and that was, to me, unheard of at the time, especially with there was not a lot of programs like that. I would say there was none, really. I know there was IAIA, but that was at the time a different type of, I don't even know if they had a master's program back then in Santa Fe, but it was good. It was really, really exciting, change to go from the heart of the colonial empire to Aotearoa, where the Maori community was really holding things down and kind of working diligently to revitalize their language, to get representation in the government, to
Wow.
navigate institutions and arts. And so it was, it was really impactful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean,
Wait a second. I got to get my bids in on the Bezel app, but more on that in a minute. I get all sorts of emails and questions from you all, which I love to read and respond. And one thing I constantly get, and even read in the Blamo Slack, is what watch should I buy and where should I get it? It's a wild world out there with all sorts of websites and shops, but I go to Bezel. Bezel is the trusted marketplace for buying and selling your next luxury watch with expert in-house authentication on every purchase. First off, folks, it's getbezel.com. That's getbezel.com. But I use and recommend Bezel because it's the best of both worlds. You can go to the site and browse a marketplace of luxury watches, over 16,000 of them, by the way, which is a lot. And I know that Bezel is going to authenticate your purchase. Or you can create an account and get connected with your own private client advisor, called the concierge. Because look, making a watch purchase can be confusing, especially when you don't know all the reference numbers. When was this made? Did they use ceramic then? Is it a triple lop, dingle top? What the heck? I don't even know. But they do at Bezel, and they're here to help. Concierge, baby. Look, if looking for your watch to mark a special occasion, or maybe you're just doing research, right? They even have their own journal where you can learn all the ins and outs about Bezel and the brands and all the stuff that's happening right now. But back to my bids. Yes, Bezel now has auctions, and not just any auctions. They got Rolex, they got Cartier, they got Audemars Piguet, all the big dogs and more. So you can discover, bid, and know the Bezel team has got your back with verified in-house authentication. So visit getbezel.com on your smartphone or computer. Bezel, the trusted marketplace for buying or selling your next luxury watch.
I mean, obviously from there you continue to have quite the illustrious career. I mean, one of the things that really, really moved me was the Never Forget series.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, because it is in your face.
Yeah, that was a big project.
Yeah.
That was 3 years. I don't think a lot of people really know the timeline of it, but it was about 3 years in the making prior to the opening of it. So,
oh my God. Okay.
Just because of the scale and the scope and the need to try to make this project happen in its best form, I suppose. So that was with Desert X, and I forget which year that work was up, but initially the work happened in concept after my first site visit to the space, and I like to visit these communities when I can. If just to you have to experience the place, the perspectives, and for me, the representation of a community versus what their actual history is always like the chosen narratives, I suppose, of place are always telling in certain ways, and a lot of times a chosen narrative will purposefully remove historical or indigenous histories or narratives to tell a different story. And Palm Springs has this connection to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Bob Hope Street and all these other that's definitely
Sinatra and all that stuff.
One chosen narrative of space. And it's funny because I think about even my own community here in Sitka, where our ancestral homelands are people have been since time immemorial, 15,000 years plus. And the historical societies in these places or the tourist industry will and have historically tried to, latch on to a different history while telling the story here. So one year there was this heavy representation of this is a Russian American city because it does have, it was historically part of Russian America Trading Company. It was the capital of Alaska at one point when Alaska became this unceded territory where even the quote unquote sale of Alaska to the U.S. from the Russian government, a lot of that took place here in my community. And the unceded aspect is that indigenous communities were not, included in any of these conversations. So, the theft of land and resource and sovereignty from communities was part of this conversation. So think about how a tourist like economy now tries to sell a history as being a Russian American city while completely purposefully ignoring indigenous knowledge, language, place names, and history of space. It's not uncommon, and it's but I'm fully aware of many indigenous people are fully aware of these things, I think, in different ways. So for me, with the process of that work, it was interesting to seek to understand what those front-facing aspects were of community and um, the romantic idea of Hollywood, the idea of it being an American dream, or the idea of it being this industry that portrays, and misrepresents intentionally, form of propaganda, even communities, so, i.e., cowboys and Indians, and the Western or the lack of voice from our communities. Tying it back to Smoke Signals and Chris Eyre or Sterling Harjo and Reservation Dogs in this era now, like 2025 we're at right now, and there is a shift. There's a shift of voices, writers, directors, actresses, and actors in these institutions now that had not always been there. That work ties in together some of these conversations and that industry directly to the iconic imagery of the Hollywood sign, which historically said Hollywood land.
Yeah.
And the land part was removed, but the signage being erected in the past as a real estate advertisement on indigenous land for white only communities and segregated communities. That's the connections that are run through these spaces in this work and in, I guess, the layers of it. So that was one aspect of that piece. The other aspect was, to do it to scale, but to do it on Quahia, to be doing this in Quahia territory on Quahia land and to do it coinciding with NALCs who I worked with in kind of taking the concept and aspects of this work and focusing it on this idea of acknowledgement in a time where land acknowledgements have become more commonplace and where they kind of are only serving those communities this like pressure release of guilt or who knows what to acknowledge a history of a land, but to do nothing for the community still. This work was a call to action over acknowledgement or after acknowledgement even. And the form of action here was highlighting the land back movement, highlighting kind of the histories of, privatization of land or full on land removal from communities through federal government's legal term Indian. So which is kind of binded over 500 indigenous communities to this kind of misrepresented term that some communities have adopted, some of like not, and choose still not to go by. So it includes that language and that history and that side of it as well, where we're still kind of legally bound to the use of that term as we navigate our rights on our homelands as indigenous people, where we navigate our subsistence rights, where we navigate even being recognized federally. I have an Indian card with a number on it, and it's the work highlights people's willingness or ability to participate in action, which was set up through monetary fund relief, or it was an ask to like return your land back to indigenous care.
Yeah.
Of course, there was not a lot of participation in that side of things. There was money raised and land was returned via that project through the NALC. And when I say returned, I mean they acquired land with the financial money, like startup money that viewers gave to the GoFundMe that was set up. So it's, the work is engaging in a lot of different threads. There's one the work still lives on right now, where we started a conversation about returning land back to indigenous community with some landowners that are non-indigenous, kind of exploring what that looks like right now in this day and age too, because everything's never that clear cut, and it's still,
Right.
the idea of privatized land ownership versus sovereignty is a different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think specifically the Never Forget series. I mean, for many folks, I mean, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of the stuff that you were speaking about. It's something you could also experience and completely understand just by, I mean, just by viewing. Because there's a beautiful video that you had done. Might have been in collaboration with Richard Meal, but there was this video that was done that was showing how you had built it and put it together. And for listeners, like it's incredibly moving. It's definitely worth watching. But one of the things that I'm curious what your take is on this is specifically in the fashion industry, and where I've been around for a long time. There is a love and admiration for indigenous culture within textiles and within accessories. I'm sure you've seen many people make I guess they would say would be like indigenous people inspired jewelry, or and so these are non-indigenous individuals making indigenous jewelry, heritage jewelry. And you had Think It Goes Like This, which is incredibly moving and thought-provoking on that. But I'm to get you to maybe expand upon this a little bit verbally, what are your feelings about some of these fashion companies who really leverage brands like Ralph Lauren that love double RL and the whole, they'll do a lot of the now recently, I will say that they took them long enough, but they started hiring actual indigenous designers to make patterns and textiles and develop them and then manufacture it. But historically, for a long time, it was not, and there was no credit, no explanation to it. But so I'm curious how that's affected you and what you've thought of that, and leading to Think It Goes Like This.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of work out there by indigenous thinkers, writers, scholars, artists that have met with appropriation or misappropriation of indigenous work, indigenous language, indigenous visual language, technology, and fought to address and continue to still educate, which is also a form of expecting us to perform work or labor to educate others about these things is also a form of exploitation, I suppose. So, in a capitalist society, the continual extraction of our knowledge shows up in a lot of different ways. And it primarily shows up when it's monetizable by those that are extracting. So, examples of this beyond something as visual and aesthetic as fashion, we can take it even to like anthropology or history, where our elders' knowledge is extracted and homogenized through a white lens, where then it becomes verifiable history or knowledge, where it's myth before that, and that's a example of this that seeps into our the narratives of how history is portrayed, told, what's considered knowledge, in institutions and university settings even. And the opposite of that, that kind of highlights this in a certain way, is when our indigenous science is shared by the same communities that are extracted historical knowledge for anthropology. The science is also shared by the same elders or communities, and it's kind of rejected by science communities today if it doesn't serve fisheries, if it doesn't serve their intentions of, our science in this fishery says there was only this much fish. Back in the 70s, that's as far as it goes. But our indigenous knowledge and science says otherwise, but it is not valued at the Board of Fish meetings and the governments that are like regulating and responsible for basically slowly destructing our environment through the process of said fishery. So that to me is really frustrating to watch and to see. And I think it highlights some of this what can we take? How does it serve us? How can we profit from this? That's a less direct way than, Jeremy Scott doing totem poles on Adidas shoes or whatever, iconography. And, I think there's artists that have done conversations with this, saying like, native collaboration over like native inspired or something like that. So
Mm.
it's and it comes down to a few things, I think. For me, it's always this call for care for the communities that create the culture and create the work and are connected to the place they are, creating from. And that call for care, I feel like it needs to happen in museum spaces, especially, we're going back to a timeline where a lot of the culture that I have studied and trained to create, i.e., totem poles, and where a lot of our cultural atu and our objects, ceremonial objects, all these things were removed from our communities during times of duress and placed into colonial institutions. Alongside that were not just these objects, but even ancestors and bones of ancestors, and there's still universities and institutions that still hold these things in their archives and their collections in the basements of their buildings. And it's those are all parts of design of, I would say, genocide, design of removing, kill the Indian, save the man, which was this philosophy of like into like forcefully assimilating culture, people into whiteness. And I think that in this conversation, it is necessary to express to these institutions still that you have to not just care for that object in that in space, but you have to care for the living culture. You have to care for the place that their cultures come from. You have to care for the language and the names that are, tied to those places. And you have to care for the sustenance of things that have like provided and allowed for culture to like exist in space and place, which is our water and our waterways, our air, salmon, all the things.
Mm-hmm.
It's all tied together. So it's not just, it's not a fall collection that could be taken and then, and then, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's I appreciate your expansion upon that. But seeing and you creating Think It Goes Like This. I'm curious how some of the stuff you'd experienced led to that.
So I think It Goes Like This is a layered work. A lot of my work has intentionally has layers to it for a lot of reasons. I think layers provide access to people from different communities and perspectives. And layers provide depth and ways of understanding. They can be open to the different perspectives as well. But I think It Goes Like This is work that's been created from appropriated imagery or carvings. So the material that this work is created from is wood, and it's totem poles that have been carved. In this case, it's rain tropical wood because that's what is available in Indonesia. And it was carved by talented Indonesian artisans that are hired for cheap labor and high skill to reproduce our cultural visual language. Oftentimes, they're hired by entrepreneurs who are not from either of the communities and are trying to exploit, a few things. One, cheap labor, and the other is indigenous culture. And the exploitation happens by, carving our objects and selling them to visitors and tourists in our communities without any of us being kind of attached to it. So we've been fully removed from this exchange of sorts. And a lot of that is tied to, I think there's a lot of things to witness in that within the frameworks of capitalism.
Yeah.
I think It Goes Like This takes non-indigenous work and makes it indigenous again through my concept and through my intent and through my stories that are shared within here. And so the title references rebuilding our own selves from other people's perceived or stereotyped, prescribed identities. And that's a lot of that. We have to navigate that often within the misrepresentation of ourselves and by society, by history, by media, the stereotype. It also references, telling these stories now with our own experience in the timeline of things. The material in the process of this is chopping these totem poles that are acquired from, basically imported. And the chopping of these totem poles references, they're chopped to like firewood size. So they're split into, if you can imagine, firewood, and they're carved. It references the history of forceful assimilation, and a lot of that history included missionaries that had been, sent to our communities. In that history, they were, stealing children, removing children from families. There was a lot of abuse that happened in these spaces, in these boarding schools or residential schools, while trying to remove language from and cultural identity. The totem poles that were the kutia, or the carvings that were seen during this time frame, were, they were our villages were full of visual language and representation, and there wasn't really a term art or language, but it was everywhere, and it was our homes. It was on our clothing and on our bodies, and then like the utensils, everyday living, representing our history, representing our connections to the history and stories of place, our clans and families we came from, or supernatural, connecting us to the supernatural world. The missionaries mistakenly thought of some of this work as like religious iconography. And in the forceful assimilation of our communities, there's stories of promising heaven, after eternal afterlife, to these indigenous people if they converted to said religion. And this afterlife also included pearly gates and streets paved with gold.
Yeah, heaven.
And so they were chopping these totems up into firewood and burning them with some of the community members that were there being, subjected to this violence. And so that work speaks towards some of that history. It speaks towards reconstructing our cultures and our communities and the stories amidst it all. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's, despite the horrendous things that have been oppressed and put upon, your culture, I think I'm very, very grateful for your work and your art, in the sense of giving me, as a person who's gotten to experience and see your art, like, I hope this sounds the right way, but actually like a form of peace through like hope, in the sense that if Jughead Jeremy over here can look at these things and be moved and have a desire to continue to research and learn more, then, oh man, like you've far surpassed that, if you can get through my bonehead. So I mean, I think I'm extremely grateful for this conversation. As you sort of start to work through your next few projects, and being a multidisciplinary artist, do you have different seasons where you feel perhaps more drawn to one medium or another?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Obviously, some of the outdoor work that can be done, like I'm preparing to carve 2 kutias, or totem poles. I've been doing some of that. It's, this is the season to do it outdoors.
Yeah.
Winter in Alaska, I can work indoors perfectly well and fine on certain things too. With music, I make music, and
Y'all scene's great.
we've got a new record, thank you, that we just finished and we'll be releasing starting this, I think June or July is when the first single drops. But
oh yeah, I'll put a link. I'll put a link to your band in the show notes. I mean, it's very good.
Sure. Thank you. There's a time for that too, I think.
Yeah.
In our community, this harvesting season brings us outdoors, and we really have to be ready and available to kind of put down whatever you're doing to go harvest, because that's its own calendar and clock that doesn't pay attention in our mind to our deadlines and our calendars or whatever. So that's the clock that I think is most kind of in charge here. So
yeah, well, that makes sense. I hear you. Well, Nicholas, I want to thank you again for your time. before we wrap, is there anything you want to add or mention that I didn't discuss or didn't, bring up?
I don't think so. I can mention some upcoming projects or something if that's helpful for things to see work and stuff. I'll be exhibiting some work at the Boston Public Art Triennial, which opens in May, and then have a solo kind of presentation of work exhibition at Mass Art Museum, which is also in Boston. So that's kind of some of the current projects coming up.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for your time. It was a huge, huge honor to chat with you, and thank you for your work and how it continues to honestly inspire and move people like me. So, but it was great to meet you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Blamo. Our show is produced by Blamo Media. We're edited by Amar Lowell, and our theme music, as always, by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. If you like what you heard, you know the drill. Share the pod with a friend. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Give us 5 stars or thumbs up on whatever other thing you're listening to us on, whether it's Dingledorp or Bing Bong, whatever it's called. But you can also follow us on Instagram for all the hot content. If you want to talk to us and give us your hot take, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at info@blamopod.com. Last but not least, super, ultra important, if I had a air horn, I would press it right now. You got to come and join us over on Patreon, because the fun never stops over there. Look, the live show, the free show, whatever you want to call this, we take breaks here and there, but Patreon, it never stops. And we also got exclusive shows like Die Workwear, hosted by Derek Guy and Peter Zotolo, and the Triple J Show, hosted by yours truly with John Moy and Gene DeLeon. There's just a ton of stuff over there. So check it out at patreon.com/Blamo. If not, no worries. We got hundreds and hundreds of free episodes in the feed, and more to come. So we will see you all soon.